I'd like to now move on to the specific companies. Bannerman Energy and Brandon Munro. Brandon's got a very high profile in the industry, both as an advocate and on various bodies, including with the World Nuclear Association in the past, and also a deep association with Namibia, which is a really important project for Bannerman Energy. Brandon comes with a background of corporate law, which is something I know a little bit about, and has also been a resource executive for a considerable period of time over the last 25 years or so. So I'd like to welcome in Brandon. Will be beaming in via our Zoom link, and hopefully we can get that underway if that's possible. Oh, there he is. Fantastic. Good to see you. And are you good to go?
Right.
Just to give a little bit of background on Bannerman Energy, in your booklets, which myself and the team put together, you'll see a bit of a profile both on the company and the individual speaker's background, much more than I can deliver. And there's an important picture, I think, one of the most important pictures for any company is to have a facility, particularly a pilot leach plant, demonstration plant, which Bannerman has undertaken. So it really de-risks projects, and that sort of thing is an important parameter for getting the confidence of both the capital markets, both debt and equity, and also for proceeding in these times where inflation and other things are actually really important issues. So
thanks very much for PAC Partners for having me on. Apologies I can't be there in person. And also for bringing extra attention to the sector at a really important time. So I'd like to talk about the way that nuclear energy is leading the energy charge and the role that Bannerman Energy is playing in that transition. Bannerman Energy is all about the supply of raw materials in the supply of emissions-free power, but we're doing it in such a way where we're showing social leadership. And we've seen some of that already with our recent acquisition of a 42% interest in the Loftal Heavy Rare Earth Project, one of only two Western world's near-term development suppliers of dysprosium and terbium. So at a glance, Bannerman, we're a 300 million market cap. We've got a cash balance of $50 million, so a very strong balance sheet that enables us to do what we need to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about the board. And as you can see, together with the sector, we've come off recent highs over the last 6 months or so. And that certainly presents a buying opportunity across the sector. And particularly once you take into account the comments that Guy Keller made, and also what I'd like to say about the emerging nuclear opportunity. So let's talk about what energy needs going forward. And modern humanity requires 4 essential elements or prerequisites that must be satisfied into the long term for policymakers not to destroy economies. So let's have a look at what they are. First of all, energy must be secure. We've learned that lesson in Ukraine. It must be reliable, it must be affordable, and then finally, what was probably top of the list after COP26, it must be clean. Now, if energy systems don't meet all 4 of those requirements, the results will be catastrophic across economies, across communities. There will be a human effect, there will be an economic effect, and there will be a political effect. Now, what I'm seeing in my work with the World Nuclear Association and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe is that policymakers are understanding this. It might not be filtering all the way to politicians, and they might not have the risk tolerance yet to start talking to their constituents about that. But policymakers, large multilateral organizations understand this. And these messages have been rammed home by the war in Ukraine. Now, let's just delve into them a little bit more. So when it comes to energy security, we knew this in the 70s. We all learned the value of energy security during the oil crisis. And of course, it's been forgotten in the unending, infinite hunt for renewable energy? Well, it's well and truly been reminded in Europe. And it goes beyond Europe because other countries, most notably China, have looked at what's happening in Europe and decided that they definitely don't want that to happen to their economies and their societies. And of course, nuclear power is a superior solution for energy security. Not only does it have stable commercial output, so regardless of what's happening in gas markets or coal markets or the sun or the wind or storage, the price of electricity from nuclear power is very consistent from over years because of the way that nuclear fuel is procured. Now, add to that the fact that reliability has really hit the headlines, and it's been bubbling up even in places like the east coast of Australia for a while, but it's been exacerbated in recent years, particularly in Europe now, but also in America during typhoons and hurricanes and polar vortexes. And all of these data points have come flooding back into the consciousness of energy policymakers. Affordability. In the Western world, we didn't even realize that affordability could be an issue. Now we're seeing East Coast power prices in Australia go up 50% on the promise that they'd go down, and absolutely skyrocketing prices in Europe that are having various secondary and tertiary detrimental effects across the entire continent. But that belies what is actually the big issue with affordability, which is affordability of clean energy in the developing world. Because quite frankly, our collective climate change ambitions, they don't stand a chance the way that people are sitting in Brussels and lecturing third world nations on how they need to stay in energy poverty to save the rest of the world. You can forget it. And I've spent enough time living in developing countries and working in other parts of Africa and Asia to understand that the response from third world policymakers is we'll get to that climate change thing once we've already ensured the urbanization and development of our communities and made sure at the very least that everyone has basic appliances in their huts. And a vast number of people have either no access to electricity today or they're in electricity poverty. There's only one solution, apart from established hydro, that can solve this conundrum of looking after the world's long-term climate interests and at the same time allow the developing world to develop. And that, of course, is nuclear energy. And then finally, of course, the thing that we were all talking about a year ago before the Ukraine war, which is clean energy, and it's become a non-negotiable. And of course, nuclear is the perfect solution. You're probably sitting in this room because you already understand that. But what do the general public understand? What are the constituencies of policymakers and politicians starting to get? Well, we've already heard a bit of this from Guy, but it's important influencers that have got the biggest capacity to move the dial in the way that Mr. and Mrs. Joe Public think about nuclear power. And, you know, when you look at it, Bill Gates is regarded as one of the better thinkers alive today. Guy talked to his involvement. Elon Musk has defined an entire generation when it comes to electric vehicles and green thinking. And as Guy mentioned, he's now well and truly overtly in favor of nuclear power. And we're even seeing the influence amongst young people now. So Greta Thunberg, who probably has the greatest climate influence on the planet amongst young people, has now conceded that nuclear power is absolutely necessary, and we certainly shouldn't be turning any more reactors off. Now, this is profound. This is the making of tipping points that can actively and aggressively address nuclear power's continuing Achilles heel. And Achilles heel, it's not safety. They're incredibly safe. You just need to understand them. It's not economics. The Achilles heel is public acceptance. And if we see an abrupt shift, which I believe we're on the cusp of, the demand for nuclear energy going forward will be dramatically enhanced from the already positive picture that we see today. And just to build on Guy's presentation, That's the uppercase scenario for World Nuclear Association. What we're looking at is the top line is uppercase demand. I've got a good feel for these numbers because I chaired the group in World Nuclear Association for 4 years that produces those numbers. And below that, you can see the various buildup of supply, with dark blue and light blue beneath it being existing supply. So you can see how much that tapers off. A few different colors of development assets that will come on and restarts, and Bannerman's Etango Project is in there. And then that salmon color that you're looking at, well, that's mines that still need to either be found, explored, drilled out, developed, financed, brought into production. There is a huge opportunity, and I'm pleased to say that Bannerman and our Etango project are right at the cusp of the opportunity that presents. So we're primarily positioned, we're in the launch window, and there's three extremely important attributes that I'd love to spend a couple of minutes drawing your attention to. So as was helpfully mentioned in the introduction, we're in Namibia, and Namibia is the perfect destination for a greenfields uranium development, as I'll tell you. We've certainly got the right ore body for the degree of demand expectations in the nuclear sector, and also some of the supply constraints that Guy set up for us very well. And I'd love to spend a few minutes telling you why we've got the right team to bring Etango into development. So if you didn't already know this, Namibia is a top 5 uranium producer. Last year it was a top 3 uranium producer, and it's been doing so for 45 years. I cannot tell you how important that is, to have existing port infrastructure, to have existing shipping lines that can carry radioactive material, to have the government having set up their own compliance regimes, to have all of the multilateral treaties in place and all of the multilateral obligations being satisfied over 45 years. So IAEA and the Namibian government know how to deal with each other. To have all of the various tertiary approvals as a matter of course, to have social acceptance, political acceptance, to have a entirely reasonable environmental regime. Those things make it an order of magnitude easier to develop a greenfields uranium project as we will. And we're lucky enough, if you can see where Etango is positioned on that side, to have the best of all of the infrastructure, including being the closest deposit to the local town, which becomes very handy when it comes to competing for workforce. The ore body, first of all, it's enormous. It's over 200 million pounds of resource, and in 2015 we put 130 million pounds of that into a mining reserve. So there is an awful lot of uranium available over the coming years to help meet that enormous deficit we saw. And in recent years we've progressed a smaller development proposition which we've called Etango 8, because it's 8 million tonnes throughput rather than 20, which is the throughput that we that featured in our definitive feasibility study back in 2015. Now, what's important about that is it gets us into production with lower development hurdles and an easier financing path. But once in production, we can expand either additional mine life or we expand into a greater throughput and a higher output of uranium. Etango 8, as it is, will have an initial average production of 3.5 million pounds. Now, that's enough for 7 to 8 gigawatts of nuclear power. So we're going to be a big player. It might be smaller than the giant-sized Etango that we were developing, but it's still a very big mine, and we still become a very significant player. And in terms of the team, so we've got a very strong board, and we've been rebuilding our management capability over the last year. But we've got, I can tell you that everyone on that board and that executive team are exceptional in their own right. I'm very privileged to lead such a team, particularly for a relatively small $300 million company. But beyond the capability that vests in those individuals, we've got the experience and the expertise where it counts. So first of all, we operate a Namibian asset, and we've got several members of our team. We've got an executive and management team based in country. And I lived there for more than 5 years, and I've been going to Namibia for more than 10. So I understand the setup very well. in addition to that. Our uranium expertise is deep where we need it. So Mike Leach, who's Executive Chairman in Namibia and sits on our Australian board, he was Managing Director of the Rossing uranium mine when that was the largest uranium mine in the world. And to this day, Rossing is still operating, and it's also the best analogue for the mine that we will build at Etango. At Etango, it's a bulk tonnage operation, it's open cut, and mining is the single most important variable. So we made sure we got the best mining guy in the country, and Werner Evolt came across as mining manager, again from Rossing, and he's been with us for a number of years as managing director in country. And when it comes to building a uranium mine, well, again, we went to the best that resides in Africa. Norman Green heads our technical steering committee. Norman's built the largest mining projects in Africa, and he also was responsible for the Husab development, a $2 billion development that was conducted about 25 kilometers from Etango. Namibian based, he's built the two largest resources developments in Namibia's history, being the Scorpion zinc mine and refinery and the Husab uranium mine. Of course, nuclear expertise is very important. We're in the nuclear business, not the mining business. And between Mike and myself, we've got very good inroads into that industry. We've got good financing understanding and very good M&A understanding. And then finally, touching on sustainability, I'd like to highlight that we recently announced that Alison Terry had joined our board. Alison, if you don't know her, she was on the FMG Exco, and she was head of sustainability for Fortescue Metals. So she resigned recently from executive life, and we managed to attract the person in charge of sustainability for a $50 billion company. So that probably tells you what you need to know about our approach to ESG sustainability and where we sit in this industry. And of course, we've got loads of operational experience. So we're not doing this for the first time, let me put it that way. What I'd like you to take away from this slide is expertise in our sector is hard to find. It's a sector that was out of favor for a long time. Finding expertise that isn't full of grey hair is even harder to find. And we've got a vibrant team that can take this project forward. We're completing our DFS, and I'll talk to the timing on that in a moment. But just to give you an idea of our project, I'll give you a few technical and economic parameters. So 8 million tonne per annum throughput for 3.5 million pounds per annum production for a total initial mine life of 15 years that will almost certainly be extended and can be expanded. That gives us 53 million pounds of production. We've got a very a world-class, I would say, heap leach amenability with our ore. So conservative processing yield of 87% with a low stripping ratio gives us an OPEX under the PFS of $39 a pound, 274 million of upfront CapEx at a assumed uranium price of $65, and touched 64 back in April. So that's a pretty realistic, perhaps conservative assumption. That gives us a post-tax NPV of 222 million, a quick payback of 3.5 years, and a healthy 20% IRR. So I'd encourage you to keep those numbers in your mind as we release the DFS in the coming weeks. One of the final attributes that I'd like to talk about is our low technical risk. It's worth reflecting on the fact that the most important decision makers in our industry don't really know much at all about mining. They're very good at running nuclear power plants. In terms of some of the sovereign players, they've got enormous access to capital, but they get a bit nervous when it comes to what a mine really means and where the shortcomings and horror stories are about mining activity. And so in that respect, we're very well positioned because we're entirely conventional. It's a truck and shovel, dig it up, crush it, put it on a heap leach it with conventional reagents, sulfuric acid, for 22 days, scoop it off, put it in the drum, and send it out to the conversion facility. Now, if there was ever any doubt about our heap leaching attributes, we built what you can see there, the demonstration plant, which was helpfully referred to in the introduction. It's put it absolutely beyond doubt. And we've consistently over several years and 6 phases demonstrated a 93% recovery in 22 days at that demonstration plant. Thank you. Okay, I'll just highlight, we do have our environmental permits, very important for this sector, good social credentials, and our timeline moving forward. We've lodged a mining license. We have our DFS to come out this quarter. We've commenced front-end engineering and design with that $50 million cash balance that we have. We've engaged debt advisors. We have a offtake work streams, and we're looking at a final investment decision towards the end of next year. Love to take some questions.
Indeed. Thank you very much from both an industry perspective and a terrifically interesting project. And a lot of work's been done through some pretty tough times. So commend you for that. Look, is there a high priority questions that you may have at this stage? It's an interesting project, interesting location. So certainly, I'm thinking with the change of the scale, does that make a particular difference to your flow sheet that will come out in the DFS, and will that change the unit capital costs because of that change in scale?
It won't make a difference to the flow sheet. And interestingly, the comparison between our costs of, say, the 20 million tonne DFS from 2015 and the PFS that I talked to is a significant economic improvement. And that's mainly because the stripping ratio went down. It is an outcropping ore body, and we did get a bit of an improvement in grade because of the nature of the ore body closer to surface. And so interestingly, we haven't given up economics because of a reduced economies of scale. It's still a very big project. We obviously have a DFS coming out. We've got some things working in favor of our numbers, as well as the well-known industry factors working against any new development project right now. So we're looking forward to putting some numbers into the public domain that I think will beat expectations. But I don't know a project in the world that's producing lower capital cost right now in the current inflationary environment.
Right.
So Brandon, hopefully you can hear just thoughts around pricing and hedging and offtake that you might need to have in place prior to a final investment decision.
Well, first of all, I'd echo Guy's comments, and we've held for several years that based on our modelling of the sector, this sector is going to have to settle at around an $80 a pound or greater long-term price to bring on the number of projects required to meet that demand. And you can add inflationary effects onto that number. So Guy mentioned $75 and upwards, and I'd concur with that. So we're going to be patient as to when we're ready to start writing contracts. Whilst you can build a fair bit of flex into a contract portfolio, nonetheless, the point that you start writing those contracts is when you start locking down shareholder value. And those decisions can be for better or worse, depending on, first of all, how good your understanding of the market is and how much capacity you've got to time that. We've been at this project for 15 years, and my shareholders really understand that we're prepared to be patient to optimize that shareholder value. And one of the steps that we've taken to do that is to have enough cash that we can equity fund our front-end engineering and design, and even detailed design beyond that, so that we can time the market as we want to see it without the project stalling or going backwards.
Right. Well, look, I thank you for that, Brandon. I know your day is a very, very busy one today, and I'm glad that you've been able to share some of your time with us. On so many levels, this is an important story, and you're putting your money where your thoughts are. And looking for those higher prices before locking anything in. So thank you very much for that.